Distracted for a second, she was suddenly kissed by a powerful man she didn't know. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us go back to the main character. She did not belong in that room. Not with the crystal chandeliers glowing overhead. Not with men in tailored suits speaking in calm, confident tones. Not with women in silk dresses holding champagne glasses like they had never worried about rent a day in their lives. Her name was Evelyn Carter, and she stood near the edge of the Grand Hotel ballroom, fingers wrapped tightly around her small clutch, heart beating a little too fast. She was only here because her supervisor insisted. Just show your face, smile, do not draw attention. It was supposed to be simple. She glanced down at her phone for half a second. One message, one distraction. And that was all it took. A tall man stepped into her space. Before she could react, before her mind could catch up to what was happening, a strong hand settled firmly at her waist. She felt herself pulled forward, her breath caught, and then his lips met hers. It was not gentle, it was not slow. It was sudden, decisive, and shocking. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn froze, her eyes wide, her thoughts scrambling. She did not know this man. She had never seen him before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly fitted black suit that radiated authority, the kind of man people instinctively moved aside for. When he finally pulled back, his voice was low, steady, and clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She is with me." Silence followed, then whispers. "Do you know who that is? That is Alexander Reed, the billionaire, the CEO. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. Alexander Reed did not look at the crowd. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable, his grip still firm, but not painful. There was something in his eyes she could not name. Not desire, not arrogance, something sharper, calculated. She tried to step back, but his hand tightened just enough to stop her. "Smile," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Trust me." Trust him? She did not even know his name until 2 seconds ago, but before she could say anything, a woman approached them, her smile tight, her gaze cold. "Alexander," the woman said, her tone sweet but forced. "You did not mention bringing a fiancé tonight." Fiancé, the word echoed in Evelyn's head. Alexander's arms slid around her shoulders, possessive, convincing. "I did not think it was necessary," he replied calmly. "But as you can see, I am no longer available." The woman's eyes flicked to Evelyn, sharp and assessing, then back to him. "How sudden." "Life is full of surprises," Alexander said. Evelyn felt trapped. The room, the eyes, the rumors already forming in the air. If she spoke now, if she pushed him away, she would be exposed, humiliated, questioned. She would lose more than her pride. Alexander leaned closer again, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you walk away right now, you will be crushed by this room. Let me handle it." Her heart pounded. Every instinct told her this was wrong. But another part of her knew he was right. So she did the unthinkable. She stayed. And in that single decision, made in the space of one stolen breath and one shocking kiss, Evelyn Carter stepped into a lie that would change her life forever. The music resumed, but the room never truly went back to normal. Evelyn could feel it in the way people looked at her now. Conversations paused when she passed. Eyes lingered a little too long. Whispers followed just behind her heels, as Alexander guided her away from the center of the ballroom, his hand still resting at her back like it belonged there. Her pulse had not slowed. If anything, it raced faster. They stopped near a marble column, just far enough from the crowd to appear private, but close enough that everyone could still see them. That, she realized, was the point. "Do not say anything yet," Alexander said quietly, his lips barely moving. "They are watching." She swallowed. "You kissed me," she whispered back, her voice tight. "You do not get to tell me what to do." "I know," he replied calmly, "and I will explain, but not here." A man approached them, older, silver-haired, his smile polite but sharp. "Alexander," he said, glancing at Evelyn, "your father has been asking about you, and about her." Alexander did not hesitate. Tell him he already has his answer. The man raised an eyebrow. So it is serious. It is, Alexander said. Very. The man nodded slowly and walked away. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. Serious. The word settled heavily between her ribs. She was already in too deep, and she did not even know how she got there. Why me? She asked once the man was gone. You could have picked anyone in this room. Alexander finally turned to face her fully. Up close, she noticed the small details she had missed before. The faint crease between his brows. The restraint in his expression. This was not recklessness, it was control. Because you were alone, he said, and because you were about to be cornered. She frowned. Cornered by who? By them, he replied, casting a brief glance toward a cluster of elegantly dressed women near the bar. They were sent to test you, to see if you were available, if you would be easy to manipulate. Her breath caught. I am not part of this world. I know, he said. That is why they noticed you. Evelyn looked down at her hands. She thought of her supervisor, of her temporary contract, of the rent reminder sitting unread in her email inbox. One wrong move tonight, one scene, one accusation, and she would be labeled a problem, disposable. I cannot do this, she said quietly. Whatever game you are playing, I cannot afford it. This is not a game, Alexander replied. It is a shield. He paused, then added, for both of us. She looked up at him again. You do not even know my name. Evelyn Carter, he said without hesitation. Her eyes widened. How do you know that? Because I do not act without information, he answered honestly. And because if you walk out that door alone tonight, they will tear you apart with questions by morning. Her chest tightened. She hated that he was right. I will not force you, Alexander continued. But if you stay by my side tonight, they will back off. They will assume you are protected. And tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow, he said slowly, we talk. A server passed by with a tray of champagne glasses. Alexander took one and handed it to her. The gesture looked intimate, intentional. Hold this, he murmured. Relax your shoulders. Let them believe it. Her fingers trembled as she took the glass. This was not what she planned when she accepted the invitation to this event. She came to blend in, to survive. Instead, she was standing beside one of the most powerful men in the room, pretending to be something she was not. Across the ballroom, cameras flashed. Evelyn forced a small smile, feeling the weight of a lie settle quietly into place. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The car ride was silent. Evelyn sat stiffly in the back seat of the black sedan, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the city lights sliding past the window. Alexander sat beside her, composed as ever, his attention fixed forward. The driver did not speak. The privacy was deliberate. When the car finally stopped, she looked up. This is not my address, she said. No, Alexander replied calmly. It is mine. The building rose above them, sleek glass and steel, discreet but unmistakably expensive. Evelyn hesitated as the door opened, every instinct telling her she should leave now, while she still could. But the doors closed behind her anyway. Inside, the penthouse was quiet, spacious, and almost austere. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. There were no personal photographs, no warmth. It felt more like a command center than a home. Alexander loosened his tie and set it aside. You can sit, he said, gesturing toward the sofa. This will not take long. I am not here to be intimidated, Evelyn said, though her voice betrayed her nerves. Good, he replied. Neither am I. He poured a glass of water and handed it to her, then took the chair across from her, keeping a careful distance. I owe you an explanation, he said, and an apology. She did not respond. At the gala, he continued, you were about to be used. My family has been pressuring me into an arranged engagement. Tonight was meant to be a final test. They wanted to see which woman would bend. And you decided to use me instead, Evelyn said sharply. I decided to protect you, he corrected, and myself. She laughed once, bitterly. By kissing a stranger? Yes, he said without flinching, because it was the only move they would believe. Silence stretched between them. You should know, Alexander went on. I do not make impulsive decisions. What I did tonight was calculated. That does not make it acceptable, she said. No, he agreed, but it makes it effective. He reached into a slim leather folder on the table beside him and placed it between them. "This," he said, "is why I asked you to come here." Evelyn looked down at the folder, then back at him. "If that is a check, I am leaving." "It is not," Alexander said. "It is a contract." Her stomach tightened. "I am not for sale." "I am not buying you," he replied. "I am offering you a role." She opened the folder despite herself. Inside were neatly printed pages, clear and direct. No hidden language, no vague promises. "Terms are simple," Alexander said evenly. "You agree to be my fiancé in public. We attend a limited number of events together. You follow a basic code of conduct. In return, I ensure your security, your privacy, and your career is protected." Evelyn's eyes moved quickly across the page. "There is a time limit," she said. 6 months, he confirmed. "After that, we part ways. Cleanly. And if I say no, then tonight ends as a rumor," he said, "and tomorrow begins with questions neither of us can control." She looked up at him again. "You are very confident." "I am realistic," he said. "This arrangement benefits us both." She shook her head. "You do not know anything about me." "I know enough," Alexander replied. "You are capable. You are invisible to them until you are not, and you are strong enough to walk away if you choose." Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "And the rules?" she asked. He met her gaze. "No real relationship, no emotional involvement. This is strictly professional." Her chest tightened at the word professional. "And the kiss?" she asked quietly. "That will not happen again," he said, "unless you choose it." The room felt suddenly smaller. Evelyn stood, pacing once, then stopped. This was madness. And yet every line in that contract was a shield she desperately needed. "I will not be humiliated," she said, "and I will not be discarded." "You will not be," Alexander said firmly. "Not by me." She exhaled slowly. "Give me tonight," she said at last. "I will decide in the morning." Alexander nodded. "That is fair." As she turned toward the guest room, Evelyn felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her. This was no longer about a kiss. It was about whether she was willing to step into a lie that might cost her everything, or save her from losing it all. Morning light filtered softly through the tall windows of the guest room. Evelyn had barely slept. She stood by the window, city stretching endlessly below, her thoughts tangled between fear and resolve. The contract lay on the desk behind her, untouched since dawn. 6 months, clear terms, clean exit, protection, control. It was everything she needed and everything she never imagined agreeing to. A quiet knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she said. Alexander stepped inside, dressed simply now, without the armor of a tuxedo or the weight of last night's spectacle. He stopped a respectful distance away. "I meant what I said," he began. "You can walk out right now, no consequences." She turned to face him. "If I walk out, I go back to being invisible and exposed." He did not deny it. Evelyn crossed the room and picked up the folder. Her hands were steady this time. "If I do this," she said, "we do it on my terms as much as yours." Alexander nodded once. "That is why there are rules." She opened the contract again, reading it slowly now, aloud in parts, as if grounding herself. "No shared bedroom," she said. "No physical intimacy beyond what is required in public." "Agreed," he replied immediately. "No control over my private life. I do not report where I go or who I see." "You keep your autonomy," he said. "Always. And if your family or your board crosses a line," she added, looking directly at him, "you shut it down." Alexander met her gaze. "I will." She paused, then added the last condition. "And when this ends, it ends quietly. I do not become a footnote in your life." He was silent for a moment, then spoke carefully. "You will not be erased." That mattered more than she expected. Evelyn exhaled and picked up the pen. The sound of her signature against the paper was soft, but final. Alexander signed after her, his handwriting precise. He closed the folder and set it aside. "It is done," he said. For a moment, neither of them moved. "This does not make us anything," Evelyn said. "Not really." "It makes us aligned," Alexander replied. For now. Later that afternoon, she stood in front of a mirror in a private suite downtown, surrounded by silence and expensive fabric. A stylist adjusted the sleeve of a tailored dress, careful not to touch her too much. This will be your look for public appearances, the woman said, confident but not flashy. Evelyn barely recognized herself. When Alexander arrived to escort her to their first official engagement, he paused when he saw her. Not in surprise, in acknowledgement. You look composed, he said. She lifted her chin. I am playing a role. So am I, he replied. As they stepped out together, cameras waiting just beyond the doors, Alexander offered his arm. He did not pull her in. He waited. Evelyn took it. Flashes exploded around them, questions shouted, names called. She felt his presence beside her, steady, controlled. This was the beginning of the performance. But as they moved forward side by side, Evelyn could not ignore the quiet truth settling in her chest. She had agreed to a lie, and lies, she knew, had a way of becoming dangerously real. The weeks that followed moved faster than Evelyn expected. Her life became a series of carefully timed appearances, polished smiles, and whispered reminders of the rules. Alexander's world was precise, calendars planned to the minute, drivers always waiting, doors opening before she reached them. At first, she felt like an imposter wearing borrowed confidence. At a charity luncheon, she stood beside Alexander as donors approached one by one. They shook his hand, then turned their attention to her with curiosity sharp enough to cut. "And what do you do, Evelyn?" a woman asked, her tone pleasant but probing. Evelyn hesitated for half a second. Before Alexander could intervene, she smiled. "I work in project coordination," she said calmly. "Mostly behind the scenes. I prefer results over attention." The woman nodded, impressed. Smart. Alexander glanced at her, just briefly. Approval flickered in his eyes. At another event, a reporter leaned too close, voice low. "Is the engagement sudden because of the upcoming merger?" Alexander opened his mouth, but Evelyn spoke first. "Our relationship is not a strategy," she said evenly, "but we support each other's work." The headline the next day read, "Reed's fiancé wins over the room." It unsettled her how easily the lie began to fit. Behind closed doors, they rehearsed. Not words, but rhythms. When to step forward, when to stay silent, how long to hold eye contact, which questions to deflect and which to answer. "You do not need to smile so much," Alexander told her one evening as they rode home. "It makes you look like you are trying." She frowned. "I am trying." He shook his head slightly. "You do not have to earn your place." The words stayed with her. At his office, she waited while he finished meetings. She noticed how people treated him. Deference, fear, respect. But when he spoke to her afterward, his voice softened. "You handled yourself well today," he said once. "Because you trained me," she replied. "No," he corrected, "because you learned." There were moments when the act slipped. Late nights reviewing schedules. Quiet dinners where neither of them felt like pretending. He would loosen his tie. She would kick off her shoes, and the silence between them felt almost comfortable. Almost. One night, during a formal gala, an investor's wife made a pointed remark. "You are very quiet for someone who married into power." Evelyn felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Alexander responded before she could. "She did not marry into power. She chose me, and I am better for it." The woman stiffened, then laughed awkwardly and moved on. Evelyn stared at him, stunned. "That was not in the script," she said later. "I know," he replied. Something shifted then. Not enough to name, enough to feel. The rules were still in place. No shared bedrooms, no touching beyond what the cameras required, no emotional involvement. But the line between performance and reality blurred in small, dangerous ways. She began to look for him in rooms without realizing it. He noticed when she was tired before she spoke. Their hands brushed once in a hallway, and neither of them pulled away immediately. This was supposed to be temporary, yet each public success made them more convincing. Each convincing moment made the ending feel further away. Evelyn caught her reflection in a mirror one evening, standing beside Alexander, looking exactly like she belonged. And for the first time, the thought frightened her more than the lie ever had. The first time it happened, neither of them planned it. It was late, well past midnight, after a board dinner that had dragged on longer than expected. The city outside the penthouse windows glowed in scattered lights, distant and quiet. Evelyn slipped off her heels near the door, exhaling as if she had been holding her breath all evening. "I forgot how heavy those smiles get," she said softly. Alexander loosened his cufflinks, setting them on the counter. "You carried the room tonight," he replied. "They listened to you." She shrugged, walking toward the windows. "I was not trying to impress them." "That is why it worked," he said. For a moment, there was no performance to maintain, no cameras, no rules being tested, just the sound of the city and the low hum of the building settling around them. Evelyn folded her arms, staring out at the skyline. "Do you ever get tired of this?" she asked. "The expectations, the constant measuring." "All the time," Alexander admitted. "But I learned early that weakness is expensive." She turned to look at him. "Who taught you that?" His jaw tightened slightly. "My family. Power comes with conditions. Love even more so." The honesty surprised her. "I never planned to be part of something like this," she said quietly. "I grew up learning how to stay out of the way. You survive by not being noticed." "And yet," he said, "you stand in front of rooms full of people who want to break you, and you do not flinch." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "I do. I just do not show it." Their eyes met, and the space between them felt different. Charged, unsteady. Alexander took a step closer, then stopped. "This is where we pause," he said, his voice low. "Because if we go further, it will not be part of the agreement." Evelyn's heart raced. "And if we do not?" "Then we keep pretending," he replied, "and eventually, that will cost us both." She swallowed, searching his face for the certainty she was afraid to admit she wanted. "You always sound so sure," she said. "Do you ever doubt yourself?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Every time you look at me like that." Silence stretched between them. Slowly, deliberately, Evelyn closed the distance herself. She stopped inches away from him, giving him every chance to step back. He did not. "This is not for the cameras," she said, her voice barely audible. "And it is not part of the deal." "I know," he replied. She reached up, her hand resting lightly against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. Steady, real. "Then do not make promises you cannot keep," she whispered. Alexander lifted his hand, hesitating for a fraction of a second before cupping her cheek. The touch was gentle, nothing like the kiss that started everything. When their lips met this time, it was slow, intentional, chosen. They broke apart just as quietly. Evelyn stepped back first, breath unsteady. "This changes things." "Yes," Alexander said. "It does." The rules still existed, the contract still waited on the desk downstairs, but something fragile and undeniable had slipped through the cracks, and neither of them pretended not to feel it, because this time, the lie was no longer enough to hold them apart. The backlash came faster than Evelyn expected. It began with a headline. A sharp, calculated article appeared online before dawn, spreading through business circles by mid-morning. Inside reads sudden engagement. A contract, not a romance? Evelyn read the words on her phone, her hands going cold. The article cited anonymous sources, insiders, leaked documents. It did not name her directly, but it did not need to. The implication was clear. She was hired. Temporary. Replaceable. By noon, the story had evolved. Commentators speculated. Social media dissected every appearance she had ever made beside Alexander. Her past employment, her lack of pedigree, her silence. She felt exposed in a way she had not since the night of the gala. When Alexander finally called, his voice was calm, but tight. "Do not read anything else. I am handling it." "I am already part of it," she replied quietly, "whether you handle it or not." They met that evening in his office, the same space where he once trained her to stand still and smile. Now it felt colder, more distant. "They should not have this," Evelyn said, holding up her phone. "The contract was private." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Only 3 people had access. One of them wanted to force my hand." "Your family," she said. "Yes," he admitted, "and a board member who benefits if I appear unstable." "And I am collateral," Evelyn said, the word bitter on her tongue. He did not deny it. "This is exactly why we had rules," Alexander said. Why this was supposed to stay clean? Evelyn stared at him. Do not say that like this is my fault. It is not, he replied quickly, but the situation has changed. She felt it then. The shift, the subtle retreat. What are you saying? She asked. I am saying that if this becomes public confirmation, he said carefully, it could cost me the company. And if you deny it, she countered, it costs me everything. Silence pressed in. The next blow came hours later. At a formal board reception, cameras waiting, a senior board member raised a glass and smiled too warmly. To Alexander Reed, he announced, and to his fiancée, whose arrangement has certainly kept us entertained. The room froze. Evelyn felt every eye turn toward her. Alexander did not speak. Seconds passed. Too many. She understood then. He was weighing outcomes. Evelyn set her glass down and stepped back. This was never meant to be permanent, she said evenly, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. And I will not stand here while my dignity is questioned. She turned to Alexander, her gaze unwavering. You said I would not be erased. His eyes met hers, conflicted, but he said nothing. That silence was louder than any denial. Evelyn walked away before anyone could stop her. By the time she reached the elevator, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from clarity. She had stepped into the lie to survive, but she would not let it destroy her. And behind her, in a room full of power and influence, Alexander Reed stood still, realizing too late that the greatest risk he had ever taken was not the contract. It was letting her walk away. The next morning, Alexander Reed woke to a silence he was not used to. No scheduled calls, no assistants knocking, no Evelyn. The penthouse felt larger without her presence, emptier in a way no boardroom loss had ever made him feel. He stood by the window, phone in his hand, unread messages stacked one after another. His name was everywhere, headlines, speculation, damage assessments, but the only message that mattered was the one he had not received. By noon, the board convened an emergency meeting. The room was cold, glass walls reflecting faces that had already decided his future. The same senior board member from the night before leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. You have become a liability, Alexander, the man said smoothly. The engagement was a distraction. The leak confirms it was contractual. Investors do not trust instability. Alexander listened, expression unreadable. So, the man continued, we suggest a clean correction. Publicly acknowledge the arrangement. End it. Distance yourself. We contain the fallout. And Evelyn? Alexander asked. The board member shrugged. She will be forgotten. That was when Alexander stood. No, he said. The room stilled. I built this company on the promise that integrity was not optional, Alexander continued calmly. And I will not erase someone who stood beside me when it was inconvenient. You are choosing emotion over control, another voice warned. I am choosing responsibility, Alexander replied. He reached into his briefcase and placed the contract on the table. This ends now, he said. With one deliberate motion, he tore it in half. Then again. The sound was sharp, final. Gasps followed. You cannot do this, the senior board member snapped. Without our approval. You forget, Alexander said evenly, that I still hold majority voting rights. Silence fell. I am stepping down from negotiations tied to this engagement, he continued. Any fallout will be mine alone. And if that is unacceptable, you are free to challenge me publicly. No one moved. The meeting ended shortly after. That evening, cameras gathered outside the headquarters as Alexander stepped forward alone. He did not wait for questions. I owe a correction, he said clearly. Yes, my engagement began under complicated circumstances, but what followed was real. And the woman involved deserves respect, not speculation. He paused. There is no contract, he added. There never will be again. Across the city, Evelyn watched the broadcast in a quiet cafe, her coat folded beside her. She had not planned to stay. She only meant to pass time. Her breath caught as she heard his words. She left before the segment ended. Alexander found her hours later. Not at the penthouse, not at a gala. At the small park near her apartment, where she sat alone on a bench, watching the city lights flicker on. I did not come to ask you to come back, he said, stopping a few feet away. I came to tell you that you were right. She did not look at him. "I should have spoken when it mattered," he continued, "and I chose silence because it was easier. I will not make that mistake again." Evelyn finally turned to face him. "You tore it up," she said quietly. "Yes." "For yourself?" she asked. "Or for me?" "For the truth," he answered. She studied him, searching for calculation. There was none, only choice. "I am not asking you to trust me," Alexander said. "I am asking you to decide freely, without contracts, without shields." The city hummed around them. For the first time since that night in the ballroom, nothing was staged, and that made all the difference. The city moved on quickly. Headlines shifted. Markets stabilized. New scandals replaced old ones. Within weeks, the story of Alexander Reed's broken engagement faded into background noise. But for Evelyn, time slowed. She returned to her routines: early mornings, long workdays, quiet evenings where she could finally breathe without performing. For the first time in months, her life belonged entirely to her again. And yet, Alexander did not disappear. He did not send flowers. He did not call repeatedly. He respected the space he promised. The only sign of him came one evening, folded neatly into her mailbox. An invitation. No logos, no press, just a simple card with a handwritten note. One dinner, no cameras, no expectations. Your choice. Evelyn stared at it for a long time before deciding. The restaurant was small and understated, tucked away from the city's glare. When she arrived, Alexander was already there, dressed simply, standing when he saw her. There was no practiced charm in his smile this time, only nerves. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for asking without pressure," she replied. They spoke like strangers relearning each other, about work, about small, ordinary things, the kind of conversation that did not need an audience. After dinner, he led her outside, where the city lights reflected softly along the river. "I did not bring you here to convince you," Alexander said. "I brought you here to tell you what I learned." She listened. "I spent my life believing control was the same as safety," he continued, "that if I planned every outcome, I could avoid loss. You proved me wrong." He reached into his coat pocket, not hurried, not dramatic. "I am not asking for another performance," he said, "and I am not offering protection." He knelt. Evelyn's breath caught. "I am offering partnership," Alexander said steadily. "Not as a shield, not as a role, but as a choice. You can walk away now, and I will respect it. Or you can walk forward with me, knowing exactly who I am and who I am still becoming." He opened the small box in his hand. The ring was simple, elegant, nothing extravagant. "This is not a contract," he said. "It is a promise, and it only exists if you want it." Evelyn felt tears rise, unexpected and unbidden. She thought of the girl who stood alone in a ballroom, frozen under chandeliers, of the woman who learned to survive by disappearing, of the lie that taught her her own strength. She took a step closer. "I do not want a life built on rescue," she said softly, "or power." "I know," Alexander replied. "I want honesty," she continued, "and choice, every day." "You will always have both," he said. She smiled then, small and real. "Yes," she said. The city hummed around them as he slipped the ring onto her finger, not as a claim, but as an invitation accepted. Months later, there was no grand wedding announcement, no spectacle, just a quiet ceremony by the water, attended by those who mattered. No contracts, no conditions, only two people who chose each other without fear. And as Evelyn stood beside Alexander, not as his fiancé by obligation, but as his partner by will, she realized the truth that changed everything. Love did not begin with the kiss that shocked a room. It began the moment they stopped pretending.